I'm Allison, 29, and I should be dead right now. 3 years ago, doctors gave me months to live with a rare blood disorder. When I needed them most, my parents vanished, refusing to help with life-saving treatments. Then my grandmother died, leaving me her entire fortune. Suddenly, my parents reappeared at my door with a brother I'd never met, their eyes gleaming with the same greed that let me suffer alone. They thought I'd welcome them back. They were wrong. Before I share how I turn the tables on my family, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family betrayal, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice. I grew up in a modest two-story home in a middle-class Boston suburb. From the outside, we appeared to be the perfect American family: father, mother, and their devoted daughter. But appearances can be deceiving. My parents, Linda and Richard, were the definition of workaholics. Mom managed a high-end retail store downtown, while Dad climbed the corporate ladder at a financial consulting firm. Their physical presence in our home was minimal, but their emotional absence was what truly shaped my childhood. My mother, Linda, had an obsession with social status that bordered on pathological. Every dinner party, every vacation, every car purchase was carefully calculated to impress others. I remember her spending hours selecting the perfect outfit for parent-teacher conferences, more concerned with how the other mothers would perceive her than what my teachers might say about my academic performance. "Appearances matter more than anything, Allison," she would lecture. "People treat you based on what they see." It became her mantra, one she repeated so often it was practically our family motto. My father, Richard, wasn't much different. His entire identity revolved around his career. He'd brag about 60-hour workweeks like badges of honor, missing soccer games and school plays with barely an apology. "I'm building our future," he'd say whenever I expressed disappointment. The future always seemed more important than the present. I tried everything to win their approval and attention. Perfect grades, extracurricular achievements, even adopting their values and preferences. I became an expert at predicting what would please them, morphing myself into the daughter I thought they wanted. Sometimes it worked, brief moments of pride in their eyes when I won the regional spelling bee or got accepted into the honors program. But those moments were fleeting, never enough to fill the persistent emptiness. The only real warmth in my family came from my grandmother Eleanor, my mother's mother. Unlike my parents, Grandma Eleanor lived in a sprawling mansion in Beacon Hill, the result of my late grandfather's success in real estate development and her own savvy investment choices after his death. The contrast between her wealth and my parents' middle-class striving was striking. What made even less sense was my parents' apparent resentment of Grandma Eleanor's money. They acted as though her financial success was somehow an indictment of their life choices. They'd make snide comments about old money and lucky breaks, dismissing the business acumen that had grown my grandfather's initial success into a genuine fortune. But what really seemed to bother them was the relationship between Grandma Eleanor and me. From my earliest memories, she treated me differently than my parents did. She saw me, really saw me. When I spoke, she listened. When I achieved something, she celebrated not because it reflected well on her, but because she genuinely delighted in my happiness. "You are enough just as you are, Allison," she told me once after I tearfully confessed to getting a B+ on a math test. "Your worth isn't determined by grades or achievements or what anyone else thinks of you." I cherish the memory of my 16th birthday, which my parents had essentially forgotten amidst preparations for an important work function. Grandma Eleanor showed up unannounced at our house that morning. "Pack an overnight bag," she instructed with a conspiratorial wink. She whisked me away to New York City for the weekend, Broadway shows, fancy restaurants, shopping in designer stores. It wasn't about the money she spent. It was about the time. For 48 glorious hours, I was someone's priority. My parents were furious when we returned, not because they'd been worried, but because they'd had to explain my absence to colleagues at their function. Their anger only solidified what I already knew. In their hierarchy of concerns, I ranked below professional appearances. Despite my emotionally barren home life, I managed to thrive academically. I graduated high school with honors and earned a scholarship to Northwestern University. Moving 1,000 miles away for college was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time, I could define myself outside the narrow parameters of my parents' expectations. College became my haven. I made real friends who valued me for my authentic self, not for what I could do for them. I discovered passions my parents would have deemed impractical: art history, classic literature, volunteer work at a local animal shelter. I called home dutifully every Sunday, but the conversations grew increasingly perfunctory, a mutual acknowledgement of obligation rather than connection. After graduation, I accepted a position with a marketing firm in Chicago. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, sitting stiffly in the audience, leaving immediately after to catch an early flight home. They sent appropriate gifts for birthdays and Christmas, and I returned to Boston for obligatory holiday visits. Our relationship settled into a comfortable distance, not close, but not actively painful either. By my mid-20s, I'd been promoted twice and had moved into a lovely apartment overlooking Lake Michigan. I dated occasionally, but focused primarily on building my career and nurturing the friendships that sustained me. For the first time in my life, I was genuinely happy. I had created a life that felt authentic and fulfilling. I maintained a close relationship with Grandma Eleanor, visiting her several times a year and calling weekly. She delighted in my professional successes, but seemed even more pleased by stories of my personal growth and happiness. "That's all I've ever wanted for you," she said during our last normal conversation. "To build a life that brings you joy." I didn't know then that the foundations of that carefully constructed life were about to crumble beneath me. At 27, my career was thriving. I had recently been promoted to senior marketing executive at my firm, managing major client accounts and leading a team of 5. My boss had hinted at partnership potential within a few years. My life had direction, purpose, and stability, everything I had worked so hard to achieve. The first signs were easy to dismiss. Unusual fatigue I attributed to long hours at the office. Weight loss I credited to stress, and skipped meals during busy periods. But when I found myself breathless after climbing a single flight of stairs, even I couldn't ignore that something was wrong. I scheduled a doctor's appointment, expecting to be told I was anemic or perhaps had a vitamin deficiency. Instead, after multiple blood tests and a bone marrow biopsy, I sat alone in a sterile examination room as Dr. Patterson delivered the news that would shatter my carefully constructed world. "I'm afraid you have a rare form of blood disorder," he said, his voice gentle but direct. "It's called atypical hemolytic anemia with bone marrow involvement. Your body is essentially attacking its own blood cells, and your bone marrow isn't producing replacements quickly enough." I remember asking practical questions with a strange detachment, as though we were discussing someone else's diagnosis. What was the treatment? What was the prognosis? Would I be able to continue working? The answers were grim. Standard treatments had limited effectiveness for my specific variant. There was an experimental treatment protocol showing promise in clinical trials, but my insurance classified it as investigational and refused coverage. Without treatment, I had perhaps 6 months to a year. With standard treatment, maybe 2 years with progressively declining quality of life. The experimental treatment offered the only real hope for remission or cure. How much? I asked, already mentally cataloging my savings and assets. "The full treatment course runs about $300,000, Dr. Patterson replied, his expression confirming what I already knew. It was far beyond what I could afford on my own. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my parents for help. Not just financial help, though I desperately needed that too, but for emotional support. I needed family. My mother answered, sounding annoyed at the interruption. When I explained the situation, her tone shifted to something resembling concern, but remained distant, as though I were describing a problematic work situation rather than a life-threatening illness. "Oh, that sounds serious," she said. "Have you gotten a second opinion? These doctors are always so dramatic." I assured her the diagnosis was certain. Then, hating myself for having to ask but seeing no alternative, I explained about the experimental treatment and the insurance situation. That's a lot of money, my father interjected, apparently now on the line. What about your savings? Your 401k. I explained that I could liquidate everything I had and still cover less than a third of the cost. I wouldn't ask if there were any other option, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. This treatment is my only real chance. We'll need to discuss this, my father replied. Let us think about what we can do. That conversation was followed by weeks of increasingly frustrating interactions. My parents would promise to look into things, but never provided definitive answers. They questioned whether the experimental treatment was really necessary, suggested alternative therapies they'd read about online, asked if I could get into the clinical trial for free. Meanwhile, my condition deteriorated rapidly. I began standard treatments, which left me nauseated and exhausted, but did little to halt the progression of the disease. I took medical leave from work, draining my sick days, and then starting short-term disability. 3 months after my diagnosis, I made one final desperate call to my parents. By then, I had sold my car and was preparing to break the lease on my apartment to move somewhere cheaper. We've thought about it carefully, my mother said, her voice artificially sympathetic. We just can't help with this treatment. We're approaching retirement age, and we can't risk our security for a treatment that might not even work. The casual cruelty of her words left me speechless. They were choosing their comfortable retirement over my life. I understand. I finally managed, though I didn't understand at all. Thanks for considering it. That was the last real conversation we had. After that, my calls went straight to voicemail. My texts received brief, non-committal responses. They sent a check for $5,000, a sum that might have seemed generous to an outsider, but was insultingly inadequate given both my need and their means. It felt less like help and more like paying off their guilt. I moved to a tiny studio apartment I could barely afford even with the reduced rent. I sold my designer clothes, my jewelry, my electronics, anything that might generate cash for medical bills. I continued the standard treatments while researching alternative options and support programs. Through it all, one friend remained steadfast. Madison, whom I'd met in college, became my rock. She drove me to appointments, helped me research medical options, and spent nights on my uncomfortable futon when I was too weak to be alone. She offered to contact my parents, but I refused. Their abandonment was a wound too raw to probe. I considered reaching out to Grandma Eleanor, but hesitated. She was in her 80s and had recently experienced health problems of her own. The last thing I wanted was to burden her with my troubles, especially knowing how powerless she would feel. Our calls continued, but I carefully concealed my illness. Summoning energy, I didn't have to sound normal during our conversations. Alone except for Madison, facing mortality at 27, I experienced a darkness unlike anything I'd known before. There were nights I lay awake wondering if fighting was even worth it, if perhaps I should accept the inevitable and spend my remaining time in something other than this miserable limbo. But each morning, somehow, I found the will to continue the battle for one more day. The physical reality of fighting a deadly illness alone is something you can't understand until you've lived it. On good days, I could manage basic self-care and perhaps a short walk around the block. On bad days, simply getting to the bathroom felt like climbing Mount Everest. My savings disappeared with terrifying speed. Even with insurance covering part of the standard treatments, the copays and out-of-pocket expenses were staggering. I applied for assistance programs, spent hours on the phone arguing with insurance representatives, and researched every possible avenue for financial help. Madison was my guardian angel during this time. She would come over after her workday, often bringing groceries or prepared meals. She organized my medications, cleaned my apartment, and sometimes just sat with me while I slept, a silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness. You would do the same for me, she insisted whenever I tried to express my gratitude. That's what friendship means. I devoted every ounce of my remaining energy to researching alternative treatment options. I joined online support groups for patients with rare blood disorders, combing through posts for any mention of clinical trials or experimental protocols. I contacted research hospitals across the country, detailing my case and begging for consideration. The breakthrough came after 4 months of searching. A research hospital in Minnesota was beginning a new phase of clinical trials for a treatment similar to the one my doctor had originally recommended. Through a combination of Madison's persistence, my detailed medical records, and perhaps sheer desperation in my application, I was selected for evaluation. The process was grueling. Madison took vacation days to accompany me to Minnesota, where I underwent days of testing and evaluation. When the lead researcher finally called me into his office, I braced myself for another disappointment. Instead, he offered hope. Your case is exactly the type we're looking to include in this trial, Dr. Brennan explained. The disease progression is advanced enough to provide meaningful data, but not so advanced that treatment would be futile. I nearly collapsed with relief. The trial wouldn't cover all my expenses. I'd still need to pay for travel, accommodation during treatment periods, and certain supplementary medications, but the experimental treatment itself would be provided at no cost. The treatment protocol was brutal. Twice monthly infusions that left me violently ill for days afterward. Weekly blood draws and bone marrow biopsies that felt like being stabbed with ice picks. Medications with side effects almost as debilitating as the disease itself. But for the first time since my diagnosis, there was hope. 3 months into the treatment, my blood work showed the first signs of improvement. Small changes, but in the right direction.
Dr.
Brennan cautioned against too much optimism. Remissions could be temporary, and my type of disorder was known for its unpredictability, but I clung to those improved numbers like a drowning person to a life raft. It was during this period of cautious hope that I received the call about Grandma Eleanor. Her housekeeper, Maria, called to tell me Eleanor had been hospitalized after a serious fall. "She's asking for you," Maria said, her voice heavy with worry. "The doctors say it doesn't look good." I was midway through a treatment cycle, my immune system dangerously compromised. Dr. Brennan strongly advised against travel. "You could catch an infection that your body can't fight," he warned. "It could undo all our progress." But this was Grandma Eleanor, the one person who had always been there for me. I couldn't fail her now. Against medical advice, I boarded a plane to Boston, wearing a mask and obsessively sanitizing every surface I touched. I arrived too late. Grandma Eleanor had passed away just hours before my plane landed. Maria met me at the hospital, her eyes red from crying. "She waited as long as she could," she said, embracing me carefully. "She kept saying she needed to tell you something important." The grief was overwhelming, compounded by the knowledge that I'd never know what final message she had wanted to share. As Maria drove me to Grandma's house, she mentioned something that intensified my pain even further. "Your parents were here earlier today," she said. "They arrived about an hour before she passed. They had been there, in the same hospital, and hadn't bothered to contact me, knowing I would be traveling to see my dying grandmother." The betrayal cut deep, reopening wounds I'd thought were beginning to heal. The funeral was held 3 days later, a formal affair that felt nothing like the warm, vibrant woman being memorialized. I sat in the front row, physically separated from my parents by only a few feet, but the emotional distance between us spanned galaxies. They offered perfunctory greetings and condolences, as though I were a distant acquaintance rather than their daughter. Mother looked annoyed when she noticed my thinness, my pallor, the scarf covering my hair loss. "You're not taking care of yourself," she whispered during the service, as though my appearance was an inconvenience rather than a symptom of my fight for survival. After the service, as we stood by Grandma Eleanor's grave, I made a silent promise. I would survive, not just for myself, but to honor the unconditional love she had given me. I would build a life worthy of her belief in me. And I would never again allow myself to be diminished by those who should have loved me most. 2 months after the funeral, as I was preparing for another treatment session in Minnesota, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The man on the line introduced himself as Jeffrey Harrington, Grandma Eleanor's attorney. "I've been trying to reach you, Ms. Reynolds," he said formally. "There are matters regarding your grandmother's estate that require your attention." I explained my health situation and travel limitations. He offered to come to me, suggesting an urgency that puzzled me. We arranged to meet the following week during a break in my treatment schedule. Mr. Harrington arrived at my modest studio apartment carrying an expensive leather briefcase and an expression of surprise he couldn't quite conceal as he took in my living conditions. He settled at my small dining table and opened his briefcase. "I'll be direct, Ms. Reynolds. Your grandmother has left her entire estate to you." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "The entirety of Eleanor Reynolds' estate, the Beacon Hill property, her investment portfolio, all liquid assets and personal possessions, has been bequeathed solely to you, Allison Reynolds." The room seemed to tilt around me. "But that's not possible. What about my parents?" Mr. Harrington's expression remained professionally neutral. "Your parents are mentioned in the will, but only to explicitly state that they are to receive nothing. Your grandmother was quite specific about her wishes." He slid an envelope across the table. "She left this letter for you. She asked that you read it privately." The remainder of our meeting passed in a blur as he outlined the extent of my inheritance. The Beacon Hill mansion valued at nearly $8 million. Investment portfolios worth approximately $12 million. Liquid assets of around $3 million. Various personal possessions including jewelry, art, and antiques appraised at over $1 million. I had become a multimillionaire overnight. After Mr. Harrington left, promising to handle all necessary paperwork, I sat on my bed with Grandma Eleanor's letter, my hands trembling as I broke the seal. "My dearest Allison, asterisk if you're reading this, I've left this world, but I hope not before having the chance to tell you how deeply I love you. You have been the joy of my life, the daughter of my heart if not my body. Asterisk I've watched you grow into an extraordinary woman despite circumstances that might have broken someone with less character. I've seen how your parents' emotional neglect has shaped you, your desperate need for approval, your fear of abandonment, your tendency to make yourself smaller to accommodate others. And yet, your essential goodness and strength have prevailed. Asterisk I'm not leaving you my estate as a reward or a consolation prize. I'm leaving it to you because I know you will use it wisely, in ways that would make me proud. Your parents have demonstrated throughout their lives that they value money above relationships, appearances above substance. They would not honor my legacy as you will. Asterisk use this inheritance to build the life you truly want, not the one others expect of you. Be brave enough to prioritize your own happiness. And remember that the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to walk away from those who cannot love you as you deserve to be loved. Asterisk with all my heart. Asterisk Grandma Eleanor asterisk I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Even in death, she had found a way to care for me, to see me, to protect me. That same week, I received fantastic news from Dr. Brennan. My latest test results showed significant improvement. The experimental treatment was working better than anticipated. While I wasn't cured, the disease was in retreat, and my prognosis had shifted from terminal to cautiously optimistic. As my health improved, I began making plans. The first step was visiting the Beacon Hill mansion, now my home, according to the paperwork Mr. Harrington had processed with remarkable efficiency. Madison accompanied me, both of us marveling at the elegant 3-story brownstone with its classic architecture and prime location. Walking through those rooms was an emotional experience. Every corner held memories, afternoon teas in the sunroom, lengthy conversations in the library, holidays celebrated in the formal dining room. I could feel Grandma Eleanor's presence everywhere, not as a ghost, but as a lingering warmth. In her personal study, I discovered dozens of leather-bound journals dating back decades. Reading them provided insights into family dynamics I'd never fully understood. I learned that my parents had approached Grandma Eleanor for money numerous times over the years, for business ventures, for property investments, for lifestyle enhancements, and had been consistently refused. Linda and Richard see money as an end rather than a means, she wrote in one entry. They believe wealth will fill the emptiness inside them. They don't understand that the emptiness comes precisely from that belief. Another entry, dated shortly after my 16th birthday, read, Took Allison to New York for her birthday. Linda was furious, accused me of trying to buy her daughter's affection. As though affection is something to be purchased rather than freely given. I worry about the values they're instilling in that child. As I continued my treatments in Minnesota, flying back and forth to Boston, I gradually settled into my new reality. The financial security eliminated countless stresses, allowing me to focus entirely on healing. I hired a part-time housekeeper for the mansion and retained Mr. Harrington to manage the more complex aspects of the estate. My improved health and financial situation didn't go unnoticed. A local business magazine ran a feature on Eleanor Reynolds' legacy and her reclusive heiress granddaughter. I declined to be interviewed, but the article included enough public information to make clear the magnitude of my inheritance. 3 days after the article was published, I received a massive bouquet of flowers at the mansion. The card read simply, "Thinking of you during this difficult time. Love, Mom and Dad." It was the first contact from my parents in over a year, since before my diagnosis, before they had chosen their comfort over my survival. I placed the flowers on the compost pile and threw the card in the trash. But I knew it was only a matter of time before they would make their next move. 3 months into my recovery, I was feeling almost normal again. My hair had begun to grow back. I'd regained most of the weight I'd lost, and while I still tired easily, I could enjoy simple activities without exhaustion. Dr. Brennan was cautiously optimistic about my long-term prospects, though I would need maintenance treatments for the foreseeable future. Madison had come for the weekend, and we were enjoying a lazy Sunday brunch in the mansion sunroom when the doorbell rang. The housekeeper, Anna, answered it and appeared in the doorway moments later with an uncomfortable expression. "Ms. Reynolds, your parents are here. With a young man they say is your brother." Madison and I exchanged bewildered glances. "I don't have a brother," I said, my appetite vanishing instantly. "Should I send them away?" Anna asked, clearly sensing my distress. I considered it. How simple it would be to refuse them entry, to maintain the peaceful existence I'd been building. But curiosity mingled with a strange, detached fascination. How would they justify their abandonment? What story would they concoct to explain their sudden reappearance? "No, show them in," I decided. "Madison, would you mind staying?" "Wild horses couldn't drag me away," she replied, squeezing my hand supportively. My parents entered the sunroom with 4 smiles, followed by a young man who appeared to be in his mid-20s. My mother had had work done, her face smoother than I remembered, her hair expertly colored to hide any gray. My father looked essentially the same, perhaps a bit heavier. The young man hung back awkwardly, his discomfort palpable. "Allison, darling." My mother approached with arms outstretched as though we'd parted on the best of terms just yesterday. "You look wonderful. We've been so worried." I remained seated, making no move to embrace her. "Have you?" "That's interesting, since you haven't contacted me in over a year." Her smile faltered slightly. "Well, we thought you needed space after everything. But we're here now, and we have amazing news." She gestured to the young man. "This is Jason, your brother." I looked at the stranger, who was supposedly my sibling. He had dark hair and was of average height, with no particularly striking resemblance to either of my parents or myself. "I don't have a brother," I stated flatly. My father stepped forward. "That's what we wanted to tell you. Before you were born, we made a difficult decision. Jason was given up for adoption. We were young, struggling financially. It wasn't the right time. We've recently reconnected through an ancestry website," my mother added smoothly. "It's been such a blessing finding him after all these years. We wanted you to meet your brother right away." The story was perfectly constructed to seem plausible while being nearly impossible to verify. A secret adoption, a recent reunion through technology. How convenient that this long-lost brother should appear just as I inherited a fortune. "I see," I said neutrally. "Hello, Jason." He nodded awkwardly.
"Hi."
This is weird for me too. Something in his discomfort seemed genuine, and I found myself wondering what lies my parents had told him, what promises they had made. We endured an excruciating dinner, my parents filling the silence with stories of their recent activities, careful inquiries about my health that never acknowledged their abandonment during my illness, and frequent references to family bonds and blood connections. Madison remained beside me, her presence a silent support. As dessert was served, my mother casually dropped what I suspected was the real purpose of their visit. "This house is so large for just one person," she observed, gesturing around the dining room. "We've been thinking, wouldn't it make sense for us all to live here together? As a family, your father could retire early, I could help manage the household, and you and Jason could have time to develop a real sibling relationship." I caught the quick exchange of glances between my parents, the slight nod from my father encouraging my mother to continue. "We could take care of you while you recover," she added, a calculated display of concern. Families should stick together during difficult times. The irony was so thick, I could barely breathe. Families should stick together during difficult times. Where had that sentiment been when I was selling my possessions to pay for medications? When I was facing death alone? "I'll consider it," I lied, unable to summon the energy for a confrontation. "It's a big decision." They left shortly afterward, promising to call the next day to continue the conversation. Jason hung back momentarily as my parents headed to their car. "I'm sorry about all this," he murmured, surprising me. "It's not. I didn't know." "It's okay," I assured him, suddenly certain he was as much a pawn in their game as I had been. "Call me sometime without them. We should talk." After they left, Madison turned to me with wide eyes. "You're not actually considering letting them move in, are you?" "Not a chance in hell," I replied. "But I need to understand what they're really after, beyond the obvious money grab. And I'm curious about this supposed brother." "They abandoned you when you were dying, Allison," Madison reminded me, her voice tight with anger on my behalf. "They don't deserve a minute of your time." She was right, of course. But something in me needed closure, needed to understand the full extent of their betrayal before I could truly move forward. The next morning, I called a private investigator recommended by Mr. Harrington. Within a week, I had a preliminary report on Jason Miller, my purported brother. He was indeed 25 years old, but he wasn't adopted. He was the son of my mother's cousin, a distant relative I'd never met. He had recently filed for bankruptcy after a failed restaurant venture and had moved in with my parents just 3 months earlier. Further investigation revealed that my parents had begun consulting with attorneys about contesting Grandma Eleanor's will shortly after the funeral, claiming I was mentally unstable and unable to manage such significant assets. Their case had little legal merit, but they could potentially create expensive and stressful legal battles. As I suspected, Jason called me privately a few days after their visit. We met at a quiet cafe, where he confessed the whole scheme. My parents had approached him after his bankruptcy, offering to help him in exchange for participating in their plan. They had coached him on family details and promised him a significant share of the inheritance once they gained control. "I was desperate," he admitted, shame evident in his expression. "But the more I learned about what they did to you, the worse I felt. The final straw was overhearing them talk about having you declared incompetent. They said they knew about your illness all along but decided not to help because they thought your grandmother would leave everything to you if you died young. The calculated cruelty of it staggered me. They had known about my diagnosis and deliberately chosen not to help, gambling that my grandmother's fortune would eventually be theirs if I succumbed to my illness. Despite the revelation, I maintain the appearance of considering their proposal to move in. They visited frequently, my mother rearranging furniture and discussing renovation plans as though her residence were already assured. My father asked pointed questions about investment portfolios and property deeds, offering to help manage these complex matters. All the while, I was formulating my own plan, one that would free me from their toxic presence permanently. The day after learning the full extent of my parents' deception, I scheduled a meeting with Mr. Harrington and a financial advisor he trusted implicitly. I needed to understand my options and protections before proceeding. "They have no legal claim to your inheritance," Mr. Harrington assured me after I explained the situation. Your grandmother's will is ironclad, and she included specific language disinheriting them. However, they could potentially file challenges that, while ultimately unsuccessful, would be costly and stressful to defend. What about claims regarding my mental competence? I asked, thinking of Jason's revelation. They would need substantial evidence and medical testimony, he explained. Given your improving health and clear cognitive function, such claims would be difficult to substantiate. Still, legal battles are unpredictable and always unpleasant. The financial advisor, Ms. Rivera, outlined various options for protecting and potentially liquidating my assets. The real estate can be sold relatively quickly in the current market, especially a premium property like this one. The investment portfolios can be liquidated and transferred to offshore accounts if you're concerned about future legal entanglements. I considered the options carefully. I had no particular attachment to the mansion beyond its connection to Grandma Eleanor, and those memories would remain regardless of ownership. The investments were simply numbers on paper. What I valued was the freedom the inheritance represented, freedom from financial worry, freedom to focus on my health, and potentially freedom from my toxic family. I want to proceed with liquidation, I decided. But discreetly. I need time to implement a larger plan. Over the next 2 months, I executed a carefully orchestrated strategy. Working with trusted professionals, I systematically sold Grandma Eleanor's properties and investments, converting them to less traceable assets. The mansion itself was sold to a real estate developer with a 30-day occupancy agreement that allowed me to remain while finalizing other arrangements. I established new identity documents, not illegal, but using my middle name and my grandmother's maiden name, creating a legal identity that would be difficult for my parents to trace. I set up accounts in countries with strong banking privacy laws and made arrangements for my continued medical treatment in a new location. Throughout this process, I maintained the facade of reconciliation with my parents. I allowed them to believe I was considering their proposal to move in together. My mother spent hours helping redecorate rooms she would never inhabit, cataloging valuable items with poorly concealed avarice. My father offered financial advice that was thinly veiled reconnaissance. Jason continued to play his assigned role while secretly providing me with information about my parents' plans. Their desperation was growing. They had significant debts I hadn't known about, including a second mortgage on their home and substantial credit card balances. They needed my inheritance, not just for greed, but for survival. 3 months after their initial reappearance, I hosted a dinner party at the mansion. The guest list was small: my parents, Jason, Madison, and me. The table was set with Grandma Eleanor's finest china and crystal, the meal catered by one of Boston's premier restaurants. My father raised his glass in a toast. To family reunited, he proclaimed, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. And to new beginnings in this beautiful home. I smiled and clinked glasses, sipping the expensive champagne while watching them over the rim. They had no idea that their new beginning was actually the final chapter. The dinner proceeded pleasantly enough, with my parents growing increasingly comfortable, making plans and suggestions as though their residence in the mansion were a foregone conclusion. Madison caught my eye occasionally, aware of what was coming but maintaining her composure admirably. As the evening wound down, I excused myself briefly and returned with a folder containing several documents. "Before you leave, I have something for each of you," I said calmly. I handed Jason an envelope. "This contains documentation of a trust fund I've established for you. It's not enormous, but it should help you get back on your feet and start over. The only condition is that you sever all ties with my parents." His eyes widened in surprise, then understanding. He nodded slightly. To my parents, I handed the folder. "This contains everything you need to know about my decision regarding your proposal." My mother opened it eagerly, then froze as she scanned the contents. My father leaned over, his expression shifting from confusion to rage. The folder contained A letter detailing my knowledge of their abandonment during my illness, bank statements showing the liquidation of all assets, documentation of the mansion's sale with a 30-day occupancy agreement, a formal statement severing all contact with them. You can't do this, my father sputtered, his face reddening. This is our family home. No, I corrected him calmly. It was Grandma Eleanor's home, then briefly mine. Now it belongs to Beacon Hill Development Group. We all need to vacate within 27 days. Where is the money? My mother demanded, her carefully maintained composure cracking. What have you done with it? It's somewhere you'll never find it, I replied. Just like I'll be somewhere you'll never find me. They exploded in predictable rage, threats, and accusations. I remained calm, having anticipated every argument. When they threatened legal action, I simply pointed out that litigation is expensive and they were already financially overextended. When they attempted emotional manipulation, I reminded them of their choice to abandon me when I needed them most. You can leave now, I said finally, standing to signal the end of the evening. Or I can call the police and have you removed. Either way, this is the last time we'll see each other. They left in a storm of threats and recriminations, Jason following quietly behind after giving me a subtle nod of understanding. After they were gone, Madison hugged me tightly. Are you okay? Better than I've been in years, I replied honestly.
And it was true.
The weight of their toxic presence, their expectations and judgments, had lifted. For the first time, I felt truly free. The next morning, I was gone, leaving no forwarding address, no trail for them to follow. Only Madison knew my destination, swearing to keep my secret. From a safe distance, I watched through updates from Mr. Harrington as my parents were forced to leave the mansion when the occupancy period ended. Their attempts to contest the will or claim fraud went nowhere without funds to pay attorneys. The financial house of cards they had built collapsed around them, forcing them to downsize dramatically and face the consequences of their choices. I had won, not just survival against a deadly disease, but freedom from the people who had never truly loved me as I deserved to be loved. The coastal town I chose for my new life couldn't be more different from Boston's urban sophistication. Here, small colorful houses line quiet streets that lead to pristine beaches. The pace is slower, the people friendlier, the air cleaner. No one knows me as an heiress or a survivor. I'm just Ellie Gray, the quiet woman who opened the small bookstore on Main Street. My transformation wasn't just geographical. I changed my appearance too. A different hairstyle, colored contacts, a wardrobe that reflected my new, more relaxed lifestyle. Not disguises exactly, but enough alterations that casual observers from my past life wouldn't easily recognize me. The letter I left for my parents was comprehensive and unflinching. I detailed every moment of their abandonment during my illness, every cruel word and broken promise. I included medical records documenting my fight for survival without their support, alongside financial statements showing all assets had been liquidated and transferred beyond their reach. I also left evidence of their plan to have me declared incompetent, statements from Jason about his recruitment into their scheme, and copies of their secret consultations with attorneys about contesting the will. Every betrayal was laid bare, leaving no room for self-justification or denial. The final paragraph was both closure and liberation. I release you from any obligation to be my parents, as you released yourself from that role when you chose your comfort over my life. I neither hate you nor forgive you. I simply choose to exist in a world where you have no power to hurt me anymore. Through carefully structured legal arrangements, I ensured they could not successfully challenge my decisions. The assets were protected, the transactions legitimate if unorthodox. They were left with nothing but the knowledge of what they had thrown away, not just a fortune, but a daughter who would have loved them if only they had let her. Madison remains my connection to the past, visiting several times a year and keeping me updated on necessary information. She told me about my parents' forced move from their home, their desperate attempts to maintain appearances despite financial ruin, their eventual relocation to a modest apartment in a less prestigious neighborhood. She also told me about Jason, who surprised us both by accepting the trust fund and using it to enroll in culinary school, his true passion before financial pressures had derailed his dreams. He occasionally sends messages through Madison, updates on his progress, and expressions of gratitude. He has become, ironically, more of a family to me than my biological parents ever were. My new life revolves around simple pleasures and meaningful work. The bookstore provides sufficient cover for my income while allowing me to create a community space I'm genuinely proud of. I host reading groups, writing workshops, and children's story hours. The store has become a neighborhood fixture, and I've found friends who value me for who I am, not what I possess. My health continues to improve. I travel discreetly to a medical center several hours away for maintenance treatments, but the disease remains in remission. Each clean scan feels like another victory, another year of life reclaimed from the shadows. A significant portion of my inheritance goes to medical research for rare blood disorders and to a foundation I established anonymously to help patients access experimental treatments their insurance won't cover. Every quarter, the foundation selects several recipients who receive full funding for treatments that might save their lives, the chance I almost didn't get. Sometimes I think about Grandma Eleanor, wondering if she would approve of my choices. I believe she would. Her journals revealed a woman who valued authenticity and self-determination above social conventions. She had the courage to define family by love rather than blood, to recognize toxic relationships and set boundaries against them. In my own way, I've done the same. Occasionally, I catch myself scanning the faces of tourists in town, half expecting to see my parents. But Madison assures me they've given up the search, convinced by attorneys that the money is irretrievably gone and any further pursuit futile. They've moved on to other potential sources of financial rescue, their patterns unchanged despite everything. Jason visits sometimes, now graduated and working as a sous chef at a respected restaurant. We've developed a cautious friendship, both of us healing from different but related wounds inflicted by the same people. We're the family they couldn't appreciate, he said during his last visit. Their loss. I've come to understand that family isn't defined by genetics or legal documents. It's built through choice, consistency, and mutual respect. Madison is family. Jason is becoming family. The community I've built around my bookstore holds elements of family. Grandma Eleanor will always be family, her wisdom continuing to guide me long after her physical presence is gone. The journey from who I was to who I am has been painful beyond description, yet strangely necessary. I would never have found this strength, this clarity, this peace without facing the darkest moments of abandonment and betrayal. From those experiences came the courage to define my own worth, to set boundaries that protect my spirit, to build a life aligned with my true values rather than others' expectations. Every evening, I walk along the beach as the sun sets over the water. Sometimes I think about the parallel life I might have lived, dying slowly in that tiny apartment, or worse, surviving but trapped in my parents' manipulative orbit, forever seeking approval that would never come. The contrast with my current reality is stark and affirming. I don't know what the future holds. Perhaps someday I'll share my story with someone special, open my heart to deeper connection without fear of betrayal. Perhaps I'll expand the bookstore, or start another business, or turn my experience into a novel with the names changed to protect both the innocent and the guilty. What matters is that these choices are mine alone, unfettered by others' demands or expectations. If there's a lesson in my story, perhaps it's this. Sometimes walking away isn't surrender. It's the ultimate act of self-preservation. Sometimes the family you were born into isn't the family you deserve. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to build a life centered on your own well-being rather than others' approval. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family relationships to save yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that choosing your own well-being isn't selfish, it's necessary. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength through adversity. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage on yours.